My father disowned me at Thanksgiving dinner. This is the story of how I made him regret it. It wasn't just about the money, though. There was a lot of it. Hundreds of thousands of dollars I poured into a family that saw me as a walking, talking bank account. It was about the look in his eyes when he chose my grifter brother over me, telling me I wasn't welcome in the home I was paying for. They thought the fight was over when I walked out the door. But my war was just beginning. My name is Audrey. Before I share my story, I want to know you are here with me. Just say, listening in the comments, or let me know where you are. I love hearing how far my story reached. Don't forget to subscribe and join me on this journey where the unspoken feelings of the past finally find their voice. Sometimes, even the smallest connection can make a story feel heard. Thank you. Now, here's how one Thanksgiving dinner ended my family and started my life. The final number on the screen glowed green, a beacon in the dim light of the conference room. A seven-figure asset recovery clawed back from a labyrinth of offshore shell corporations and encrypted ledgers. It was a digital ghost hunt, and I had just dragged the phantom back into the material world, kicking and screaming. My boss, David Chen, clapped a hand on my shoulder, his reflection appearing next to mine in the dark glass overlooking the Boston seaport. Excellent work, Audrey. That bonus is well earned. I gave a curt nod, the adrenaline of the chase already beginning to fade, leaving behind the familiar hollow quiet. Back at my desk, the city lights of the Seaport District spread out before me, like a carpet of scattered diamonds. It was a world I understood, a world of logic, data, and consequences. I clicked open the one file on my desktop that defied all of it, Andromeda Fund. It was the portfolio for a life I hadn't yet allowed myself to live. A meticulously planned architecture of long-term growth stocks, index funds, and a single high-risk, high-reward biotech venture. It was perfect. It was also almost entirely empty. A blueprint for a skyscraper with no funding for the foundation. For 8 years, every spare dollar that should have been its steel and concrete had been diverted to another project, the family trust. A gilded cage disguised as a financial instrument. But this time felt different. I ran the numbers on the bonus David had just confirmed. It was substantial. For the first time, the math actually worked. I could inject the required life support into the trust and make the first significant deposit into Andromeda. A real deposit. A beginning. A fragile tendril of hope began to unfurl in my chest. This is the last year I promised myself the words, a silent mantra. This is the last time I sacrifice my future for their facade. As if on cue, my phone vibrated, shattering the quiet. The name on the screen was a summons Eleanor. Audrey, darling. My mother's voice was like warm honey and just as sticky. I'm so glad I caught you. I was just telling your father how lovely it will be to have everyone together for Thanksgiving this year. It's going to be so special. She never asked if I was coming. She simply announced the verdict. I made a non-committal noise. And Audrey, she continued, her voice dropping into a conspiratorial whisper the hook carefully baited. Your brother, Julian, he has this incredible new project. Your father is so proud. He says this one will change the family's fortunes. I felt the tendril of hope in my chest wither. It was the same script, a different year. A new world-changing idea that would inevitably require a cash infusion from an invisible investor. Me. Yet a toxic, treacherous part of me, the part that hadn't yet been cauterized by years of disappointment, wanted to believe her, just for a moment. I let myself imagine a world where Julian finally succeeded, where the black hole at the center of our family finances finally closed. I'll be there. Mom, I said, my voice flatter than I intended. The lie tasted like ash in my mouth. The drive from the sharp modern angles of the seaport to the historic brick and ivy grandeur of Beacon Hill was a journey through centuries. My apartment was in a building made of glass and steel, a testament to transparency and clean lines. My parents' house was a monument to secrets, a place where appearances were the only currency that mattered. From the street, it was perfect. A 4-story brick townhome with black shutters and a gas lamp that flickered elegantly beside the polished front door. But I saw what others didn't. I saw the faint spiderweb of a crack in the window pane on the second floor, the subtle warp in the wooden door frame that meant the foundation was settling unevenly. It was the family crest, beautiful decay. I let myself in my arms full of the ridiculously overpriced artisanal cheeses my mother had requested. She was in the parlor complaining to someone on the phone about the cost of fresh flowers, while a newly opened bottle of Veuve Clicquot sat sweating on a silver tray. The cognitive dissonance was staggering. "Oh, Audrey, thank you," she said, barely glancing at the bags. "Your father just bought the most divine Bordeaux for Thanksgiving. He wants to make a good impression." She never said for whom. The guest list as always consisted of the 4 of us. Her eyes took on that familiar, dreamy glaze. "You simply must hear about Julian's new venture. It's all so visionary." I needed to escape. "I'll just put my bag in Dad's study." The study was my father's sanctuary, paneled in dark mahogany and smelling of old leather and pride. As I set my briefcase down on a worn armchair, my eyes caught a piece of mail on his antique desk. It was lying face up, an island of stark white in a sea of dark wood. The letterhead was from the bank that managed the trust. My breath hitched. Bold black letters spelled out the words, "Overdraft notice." My training took over. My mind processed the data with cold, brutal efficiency. The notice was dated November 20th. I had authorized the last wire transfer on the 18th, a significant sum meant to keep the account stable through the end of the year. It was gone. All of it. In less than 48 hours. The black hole was actively feeding. The hope I'd foolishly entertained just 2 days prior dissolved into a cold, heavy dread in the pit of my stomach. "Find what you were looking for." My father's voice was like gravel. He stood in the doorway, his large frame filling the space. His eyes flicked from my face to the letter on his desk, and a mask of irritation settled over his features. There was no explanation, no flicker of shame. "Don't poke your nose into things that don't concern you," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. He walked past me to the liquor cabinet, pouring himself a whiskey. "How is your little computer job going? Still making money for other people?" It was his favorite way of diminishing me, reducing my entire career in forensic finance to something small and insignificant. I didn't answer. The silence stretched thick and suffocating. As I turned to leave, he spoke again, his back still to me. "This year, Audrey, I want you to listen to your brother. Really listen. Sometimes men of great vision require support from those who are merely diligent." It wasn't a suggestion. It was an order. He was preemptively assigning my role for the upcoming holiday. I was not the daughter. I was the diligence, the support, the funding. I walked out of the house without another word, the weight of the coming battle settling on my shoulders like a shroud. Thanksgiving Day arrived cloaked in a sky the color of slate. The dining room was a stage set for a play about a happy, successful family. The good silver, the crystal glasses, the flickering candlelight. It was all there, a beautiful fragile lie. Julian arrived fashionably late, wrapped in a cashmere coat I knew for a fact cost more than my first car. He moved with an unearned swagger, accepting our parents' fawning greetings as his royal due. The visionary has arrived, Arthur announced with a booming laugh that didn't reach his eyes. The meal was a masterclass in passive aggression. My father praised Julian's unconventional path, while my mother lamented how corporate life must be stifling my creativity. Every attempt I made to discuss a recent success at work was expertly deflected back to Julian's vague and glorious future. Then came the main event. After the turkey was carved, Julian theatrically cleared his throat and stood up. He began his pitch for an AI-driven hedge fund, a symphony of buzzwords and empty promises. He spoke of proprietary algorithms, synergistic alpha, and disrupting the fintech paradigm. He clicked through a PowerPoint on his laptop, filled with impressive-looking charts that were utterly devoid of real data. To my parents, it was genius. They nodded along their faces glowing with pride. For a terrifying second, watching their rapt expressions, I could almost see the appeal. The performance was flawless. If you didn't know what to look for, you'd believe him. When he finished, my father looked directly at me, a challenge in his eyes. Well, Audrey, what do you think of that? I kept my voice, even the tone I used when deposing a hostile witness. It's a compelling narrative, Julian. But I have a few technical questions. I didn't wait for permission. What data set was your backtesting model run on? What's the projected Sharpe ratio compared to, say, the Renaissance Medallion Fund? And which SEC exemption are you filing under for the initial capital raise? The questions hung in the air like icicles. Julian's confident smile faltered. He blinked, the carefully constructed facade cracking. That's all technical jargon, Audrey. You wouldn't understand the bigger picture. Try me, I said, my voice dangerously soft. He couldn't. He stammered, his face turning a blotchy red, and finally resorted to his only remaining weapon: personal attack. What do you know? You're just a boring corporate drone with no vision. She knows numbers. Julian? My father interjected, his voice rising. And she knows her place is to support her family, not interrogate it. The argument exploded. I looked to my mother, a desperate final appeal. For a split second, I saw a flicker of doubt in her eyes, a wince of discomfort. She knew I was right. She knew Julian was a fraud. My heart leapt. Say something, I pleaded silently. Just once, say something true. She looked from me to my father, who was now glaring at her, his jaw set like granite. And just like that, the flicker died. She turned to me, her face a mask of disappointment. Don't be so hard on him, Audrey. Families are supposed to support each other. That was it. The final betrayal. The sound of the lock clicking shut on the gilded cage. My father, emboldened by her surrender, slammed his hand on the table, making the crystal glasses jump. His face was purple with rage, a torrent of grievances finally unleashed. I am sick of your arrogance, your jealousy. You walk in here with your fancy job and your smug questions, looking down on all of us. You think you're better than him, than any of us. He stood up, pointing a trembling finger at me. The final verdict was about to be delivered. Money doesn't make you family. He roared, the words echoing in the sudden, shocked silence. We don't need your filthy dollars. If you can't support your own brother, then get out of this house and don't come back. The world went quiet. The pain I should have felt was absent, replaced by a strange and terrifying clarity. It was the calm I felt right before closing a case, the moment all the disparate pieces of evidence finally clicked into one undeniable truth. I slowly, deliberately placed my linen napkin on the table beside my plate. I stood up. My movements were fluid, unhurried. I looked my father in the eye. My voice, when it came, was not the voice of his daughter. It was the voice of his creditor. "You're right, Dad." I said the words clear and steady. "Money doesn't make you family." I let the sentence hang in the air for a beat, a final cold transaction between us. So let's see how long this family lasts without it. I turned and walked out of the dining room. I didn't run. I didn't look back. The sound of the heavy oak door closing behind me was the only answer I needed. It was the sound of a ledger being closed, a final entry in a book of bad debt. It was the sound of the end. There were no tears on the drive back to my apartment. The raw wound of my father's words didn't bleed. It flash froze, turning into a crystalline shard of purpose in my chest. Grief is a luxury, a chaotic emotion I couldn't afford. What I needed now was order. Inside, with the Boston skyline glittering coldly outside my window, I didn't pace or scream into a pillow. I brewed a pot of Earl Grey tea, the scent of bergamot cutting through the sterile air of my apartment. I sat at my desk, the glow of my monitors painting my face shades of blue and white, and I went to work. This was my domain. The chaotic, emotionally fraudulent world of my family was finally being dragged into an arena of logic and consequence. I opened the encrypted files that housed the administrative backend of the Sterling Family Trust, a name my father had chosen for its old world gravitas, a name that had become a bitter joke. My fingers flew across the keyboard. There was no rage in my movements, only the cold, efficient precision of a surgeon. I compiled years of my salary statements, wire transfer confirmations, and the trust's own bank records into a single, unassailable document. It wasn't an emotional plea. It was a forensic report. I created charts that visualized the flow of capital with brutal clarity, a thick, steady river flowing from my income branching into a delta of disastrous expenditures. Julian's failed crypto schemes, the down payment on his luxury SUV, the dues for my father's golf club, the mortgage on a house I was no longer welcome in. When the report was finalized, I drafted 2 emails. The first was to the Wealth Management Division of the bank, addressed to the Senior Trustee Officer. The subject line was Clinical Urgent Review and Temporary Administrative Freeze Request for Sterling Family Trust Act 74B38. The body of the email was brief, citing significant transactional irregularities and suspected fraudulent disbursements inconsistent with the trust's stated purpose. I requested an immediate administrative freeze pending a full investigation, a right afforded to me as a primary contributor with technical oversight. I attached the forensic report as Exhibit A. The second email was to Mr. Albright, my father's lawyer for the past 30 years. I attached the same report. The body of this email was even shorter. Mr. Albright, for your records. I hit send on both at the exact same time. Then, with a series of keystrokes, I revoked my father's administrative access, changed all passwords to a 64-character string of cryptographic nonsense, and locked him out of his own gilded cage. My final act that night was small but seismic. I opened the file named Andromeda Fund. I initiated a transfer from my personal checking account. The amount was insignificant, $100. But as I watched the balance change from zero It felt like I was planting a flag on a new world. Then, for the first time in 8 years, I turned off my phone. I woke up on Black Friday to a world that was blissfully, unnervingly silent. I left my phone off. I went to a small cafe in the North End, ordered a cappuccino and a cannoli, and opened a novel I'd been meaning to read for months. For the first time, the only crisis I was managing was the fictional one on the page. Around noon, I finally turned my phone back on. It exploded. 37 missed calls, 52 text messages. The screen was a rolling tide of notifications, a digital tantrum. I scrolled through them with a detached curiosity. The first texts from my mother were pure rage. "What did you do?" Then panic. "The bank just called your father. They said the account is frozen. This is your fault." Audrey Julian's were less articulate, a string of curses and accusations. "You ruined everything. My deal is dead because of you. You're dead to me." Ironic, I thought, considering the source. The story of what happened that morning came later relayed to me with a sort of grim satisfaction by my Aunt Catherine. Julian had apparently swaggered into a high-end watch boutique on Newbury Street to purchase a celebratory timepiece for a deal that didn't exist. He'd handed over the trust's exclusive-looking debit card only to have it declined. And not just declined, but flagged and confiscated by the store manager due to a bank alert. The public humiliation, my aunt said, had been spectacular. That was the first ripple. I let their frantic messages swirl in the digital ether for another hour before composing a single, unified response. I sent it as a group text to my father, mother, and brother. It read, "Please direct all questions to Mr. Albright. He has all the necessary information." With that, I pushed them out of my world and into a world of legal frameworks and professional consequences. I put them on my home turf. The game had changed. They just didn't know it yet. The barrage of angry texts and voicemails stopped as abruptly as it began, replaced by a chilling silence that lasted for 3 days. They were consulting with their lawyer. I knew this because Mr. Albright had called my office flustered and confused and was promptly routed to my company's legal department. They were figuring out their next move. It came on Tuesday afternoon. A call from Eleanor. I let it go to voicemail, but she called back immediately. And again. On the third try, I answered, putting the phone on speaker as I continued to analyze a data set on my screen. Her voice was unrecognizable, a quavering, tear-soaked whisper. The anger was gone, replaced by a far more insidious weapon guilt. "Audrey, please," she sobbed. "It's your father. The stress. It's been too much. He had chest pains last night. The doctor said his blood pressure is dangerously high. He's been up all night just staring at the wall." She took a ragged breath. "If anything happens to him, Audrey, if anything happens, it will be on your conscience for the rest of your life." For the first time since I walked out that door, my resolve wavered. A cold spike of fear and guilt shot through me. Did I go too far? Is this my fault? The image of my father, stubborn and proud, but also mortal, flashed in my mind. The analytical part of my brain screamed that this was a classic manipulation tactic. But the part that was still a daughter was terrified. I was close to breaking. I told her I had to go and hung up my hand, trembling. My fingers moving on autopilot, dialed my Aunt Catherine, my mother's younger sister, and the only person in the family who dealt in facts, not fiction. I recounted the conversation, my voice tight with a panic I hated. Catherine listened patiently, before letting out a long, weary sigh. Audrey, honey, don't you dare fall for it. Not for 1 second. But what if he's really sick, Aunt Kath? I spoke to your mother an hour ago, she said, her voice laced with the cynicism of someone who'd seen this play before. She was complaining because she couldn't find a caterer on such short notice for their annual Christmas party. Said she might have to cancel if the unpleasantness with the bank wasn't sorted out. The air left my lungs. The Christmas party. Oh, and your father isn't in a hospital bed, she added, delivering the final killing blow. He's at the Belmont Country Club. My friend Carol saw him there this afternoon. Apparently, he was trying to hit up some of his golf buddies for a short-term loan. No one was biting. The shock of the brazen pathological lie was like a bucket of ice water. The guilt vanished instantly, replaced by a glacial rage. They would literally use the threat of his death as a negotiating tactic. My hands were steady now. I picked up my phone and sent a single text message to my mother. If Dad is having a genuine medical emergency, call 911. Their emotional assault having failed, my father decided to pivot to a field he knew even less about than finance the law. A week later, a thick envelope arrived at my office via courier. It was a letter from a law firm I'd never heard of, some small-time operation run by a man I vaguely remembered as one of my father's golf buddies. The letter was a masterpiece of blustering incompetence. It accused me of elder financial abuse, illegal seizure of assets, and tortious interference. It was filled with typos and puffed-up legal jargon that amounted to a temper tantrum on expensive letterhead. It demanded I restore all access and control of the trust to Arthur Sterling within 48 hours or face immediate legal action. It was meant to terrify me into submission. I almost laughed. I walked down the hall to David Chen's office and handed it to him. He scanned the first page, a small smirk playing on his lips. This, he said, sliding it back across his desk, is amateur hour. Let's not waste our own time. I'll have Susan from legal take a look. Susan, the head of our firm's notoriously sharp legal department, drafted a response that was the legal equivalent of a nuclear strike. It was polite, professional, and utterly devastating. It calmly outlined my legal standing as a primary contributor and administrator. My fiduciary duty to flag suspicious activity with a subtle nod to Julian's documented history of fraud and the fact that all actions taken were in full compliance with both banking regulations and the trust's own charter. The letter concluded with a beautifully passive-aggressive paragraph, stating that, while I had no desire for further conflict, any attempt to file a suit based on the spurious claims in their letter would be considered a frivolous lawsuit, and we would not hesitate to countersue for all legal fees and associated damages. The letter was sent, and from my father's legal puppet, there was only silence. The attack had been repelled. His king was in check. I allowed myself a moment of relief, a deep breath. I thought foolishly that he might finally realize he was outmatched. It was late Friday afternoon. The relief was still a warm hum in my chest. I was finishing up a report, looking forward to a quiet weekend, thinking that maybe, just maybe, the worst of the storm had passed. An email notification popped up on my screen. It was from David. The subject line contained a single, heart-stopping word: urgent. My blood ran cold. I clicked it open. He had forwarded an email he'd just received. The sender was Arthur Sterling. The recipient was Helena Vance, the head of human resources for my entire company. My eyes scanned the text, my mind struggling to process the depth of the betrayal. It was written in the voice of a heartbroken, deeply concerned father. He wrote of his profound worry for my deteriorating mental state. He mentioned my erratic and paranoid behavior, my delusions about family finances. He claimed I had suffered a severe emotional breakdown after Thanksgiving and had launched a vindictive financial attack on my elderly, financially unsophisticated parents. He wasn't just attacking me anymore. He was trying to professionally assassinate me. The email ended with a sentence designed to destroy everything I had built. "We are deeply concerned," he wrote, "that putting someone in her fragile state in charge of sensitive financial information could pose a significant risk to your company and its clients." I sat there frozen, staring at the screen. The storm hadn't passed. They had failed to break me with guilt, and they had failed to break me with the law. So they had found a new path, a new weapon. They were aiming for the one thing I had left: my career, my reputation, my sanity. The battle had just moved inside the castle walls. I walked into the glass-walled conference room with my head high and a folio tucked neatly under my arm. The harbor shimmered beyond the window, a sheet of steel under gray light. My heartbeat was steady, almost unnaturally calm. This wasn't a family ambush or a holiday dinner. It was a hearing, and hearings were my native language. David Chen sat at the far end of the table, sleeves rolled up, his face unreadable. Beside him was Linda Park, the head of HR, with a legal pad squared precisely in front of her. She offered a professional half-smile, the kind reserved for delicate cases. I laid my folio on the table and slid the first document forward. The letter from my father's lawyer, full of bombast and typos. On top of it, I'd clipped our firm's response, a concise demolition. "I'm not here to ask for sympathy," I said, my voice level. "I'm here to provide context. That email you received wasn't an isolated concern about an employee's stability. It was the third escalation in a sequence of failed attempts to pressure me into restoring access to a family trust." Linda's pen tapped once. "Walk us through it." I did. Calmly. First, the manipulative guilt calls from my mother, then the amateur legal threat. Finally, the HR email weaponizing my career because nothing else worked. I slid forward screenshots of messages, Eleanor's late-night sob story about chest pains, followed by her complaints about catering for Christmas. Dates. Timestamps. No adjectives. "This isn't a mental health crisis," I said. "It's leverage." When emotions and fake legal threats failed, my father tried to compromise my professional standing. "I'm asking you to recognize it as what it is, an external pressure campaign unrelated to my work." I paused, letting the silence settle like dust in a courtroom. "If there are concerns about my performance, pull the numbers. Every asset recovery, every audit. They stand." David glanced at Linda. "We already did." "Clean as they come." Linda closed her notepad with a precise flick. "From an HR perspective, the course is clear. We'll treat any further contact from your father as harassment. He'll be informed that all communication must go through legal channels. There is no basis to question your employment here." No applause, no gavel, just the clean click of a safeguard sliding into place. David leaned back. "Audrey, thank you for handling this the way you did. It strengthens trust, not weakens it. If you need support, say so. Otherwise, a small wry smile. Let's get back to work." As I gathered my documents, I felt something shift inside me. He hadn't just failed to ruin me. In trying, he had fortified me. My reputation stood taller than before, not because of sentiment, but because of evidence. At the door, I said, "He thought he could drag this company into his game. Thank you for proving him wrong." and then I walked out into sunlight, sharp enough to cut glass. The firewall held. The first crack appeared in a letterhead envelope delivered to Beacon Hill. Inside was a notice from the bank. Irregular disbursements inconsistent with trust purpose. Freeze extended pending full review. Collateral subject to seizure. Translation: the house was now a bargaining chip. Julian's panic arrived next in a 2 a.m. voicemail. His voice was stripped of swagger words tumbling over each other. "You can fix this, Audrey. Just tell the bank it was a misunderstanding. They'll listen to you. Please." The line dissolved into background noise, a slammed door, a curse. The bank didn't wait for explanations. They sent a second letter. Notice of potential default. It was the kind of phrase that rearranges lives without raising its voice. Then came the meeting. I didn't attend, but I didn't need to. I received the play-by-play from Aunt Catherine, and later from the bank's dry official summary. It unfolded in a sterile conference room, the bank reciting dates, amounts, signatures. Each line a nail. My father tried indignation, then wounded disbelief, as if rules shouldn't apply to him. But the documents bore his name in ink over and over. And Julian, his golden boy, delivered the final blow. I only proposed ideas, he said. I never had authority. My father was the trustee. He approved everything. The responsibility is his. No drama, no raised voice, just a clean pivot to survival, leaving Arthur Sterling squarely in the wreckage. For a man like my father, shame wasn't the end. Recognition was. In that instant, the mythology he'd built collapsed under the weight of a single fact. The son he had shielded, worshipped, and sacrificed everything for had abandoned him without hesitation. The bank's follow-up arrived before sunset, proceeding toward remediation. Absent cure, collateral liquidation will commence. The walls were closing in. Julian called me again that night. I didn't pick up. His text followed. "We can fix this if you just tell them it was a mistake." I stared at the screen, typed and deleted 6 different responses. In the end, I sent one line: "The bank is doing its job. So am I." For the first time in weeks, I slept through the night. The fire was burning exactly where I'd drawn the fire break. But in the morning, a new message waited. From Albright. "My father's lawyer, your father, requests to see you privately. He will come to your building this evening at your convenience." I read it twice. The cornered rat was coming to my door. The buzzer sounded just after dusk, when the rain had turned the seaport into a sheet of graphite. On the lobby monitor, my father looked smaller than I remembered. Coat too big, hair, damp shoulders, caved in, around some invisible load. I could have let him stand there. Instead, I pressed the door release. The elevator hummed. A minute later, he was at my threshold, not crossing it, waiting like a man who had finally learned that entry isn't a right. "Come in," I said, and stepped back. He didn't sit. He didn't comment on the view or the furniture. He set a thin, scuffed folder on my coffee table with careful hands, as if it contained something breakable, and kept standing, eyes on the floor. When he spoke, the voice was sanded down to its grain. "Julian told the bank it was me," he said. "He said I approved everything." He drew a breath that caught. He was right. The admission didn't explode. It settled like dust, inescapable everywhere. He tapped the folder. "This should have been the fund we backed." His mouth worked around the next words like they were new to him. "You." Not him. The last pronoun fell without a fight. I destroyed the wrong fund. I opened the folder. Inside, my old Andromeda printouts, yellowed models from a decade ago. margin notes in my eager, early handwriting, my name in ink plans I'd mothballed to underwrite a mirage. He'd kept them, not as evidence, as relic. He wasn't apologizing. He wasn't asking for anything. He was performing the only sincere act left to him, returning what he'd taken for granted. I watched in real time the collapse of a myth patriarch dissolving into man, certainty into regret. "You're right," I said, "because the accounting required it." "You did." He nodded once, a jerky movement that seemed to use more energy than it should. The rain ticked against the windows. There was nothing to negotiate. The market had already priced in the truth. He turned, opened the door, paused like he might add a sentence, then left without it. After he was gone, I spread the papers across the table. My younger self looked up from the margins, ambitious, unjaded, certain that discipline could purchase freedom. I stood there a long time, until the city's noise softened to a steady, forgiving hush. The tyrant hadn't asked to be absolved. I hadn't offered it. But a balance had moved out of myth into math. One last entry remained. 3 weeks later, I sat in a conference room that smelled like toner and fresh binders. My attorney walked me through the packet tab by tab until the shape of the transaction was as clean as a surgical plan. "Final review," he said. "Sale authorization for the Beacon Hill property. Distribution waterfall per your instruction. Annuity establishment with a third-party administrator. Disinheritance clause as to Julian. Remainder transfer into Andromeda." He looked up. "We can push this harder if you want. You have grounds to let the bank foreclose and litigate the rest." "I don't want a bonfire," I said. "I want a close." The terms were simple because they were honest. The house would be sold. The bank would be paid. A modest annuity, small by my family's theatrical standards, sufficient by adult ones, would be created for Arthur and Eleanor, administered by someone who would never pick up their phone. No emergencies, no loans, no middle-of-the-night pleas. Basic expenses and nothing more forever. Julian would receive exactly what he had earned. Nothing. And the remainder, the real remainder, the one I had worked for, would move where it should have gone years ago. My lawyer slid the signature page toward me. I signed each stroke a cut. I initialed the margins, dated the line, set the pen down. The room didn't cheer. The building didn't hum. A life simply rebalanced itself. "Congratulations," he said, and meant it in the way attorneys do, when a problem is now a file in a closed drawer. Outside, the air had the brittle clarity of winter about to arrive. I walked home the city clean-edged and legible, and when I reached my door, I didn't buzz anyone in. I didn't need to. The last lock I'd been carrying was inside, and it had finally clicked open. I poured tea, opened my laptop, and logged into the account I'd once been afraid to fund. Andromeda's dashboard bloomed to life, numbers, precise and unspectacular in the way solid things are. I set the transfer, watched the balance increment, and felt something untheatrical but enormous. The return of my own gravity. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't revenge. It was an audit completed and a ledger at last closed. 1 year later, San Diego sunlight feels engineered, clean, generous, almost algorithmic in its reliability. I sat at a little cafe, a block from the water laptop, warm under my wrists, the Andromeda dashboard steady and green. Beside it, a tab with contracts for my consulting firm. 3 clients, all referrals, all word of mouth, earned, not inherited. My phone buzzed. "And Catherine." I answered on. Speaker watched a gull consider a croissant 2 tables over. "Report from back east," she said. "Your parents took the apartment. It's quiet. Your mother has a new hobby of comparing grocery circulars. Your father doesn't talk much. He hasn't said Julian's name in months. And Julian I asked because even closed ledgers have footnotes. Selling high-end mattresses of all things. He tells customers the future is sleep tech. A pause. He didn't ask about you. Good, I said, and meant it. We made plans for a visit somewhere with cliffs and a loud ocean. After we hung up, I closed my laptop and let the screen go blank. The ocean breathed in, out, a metronome with no agenda. I took a sip of coffee and looked toward the water. The past wasn't a prison anymore. It was ash scattered so widely, it could no longer stain anything. I had made him regret it, not with spectacle, but with systems, with boundaries, with a future that refused to fund the lie. Then I smiled small, private, sufficient, and walked toward the afternoon as if it were mine. Because it was. Sometimes the hardest storms show us what we're truly made of. Letting go doesn't mean losing it, means choosing yourself and choosing peace. We can't rewrite the past, but we can decide the future belongs to us. If you've ever felt family as both shelter and scar, if you've ever stood at the edge of walking away or holding on, or if you simply understand this story, just comment, yes. Sometimes listening is enough. Sometimes sharing is healing. Take care of yourself because you're stronger than you think, and you don't have to carry it alone.